Bjorn Ironside was a renowned Norse chieftain and legendary king of Sweden, celebrated both for his fierce warrior spirit and his lineage as a son of the famed Viking hero Ragnar Lothbrok. His name echoes across the annals of history for his daring raids across England, West Francia, and even the distant shores of the Mediterranean. In time, he rose to power as the overlord of Sweden and is credited with founding the House of Munso, a royal dynasty that would rule Sweden until around the year 1060. Bjorn's exploits and legacy are preserved in a variety of medieval sources. He appears in the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok and the tale of Ragnar's sons, the Gesta Danorum, the Hervarar saga, the deeds of the Norman dukes, among others. In this video, we journey through the ancient sources that recount the life of Bjorn Ironside, uncover the origins of his fearsome name, and follow the course of his daring raids and legendary exploits. Rather than blending the sagas into a single timeline, I will share Bjorn's story as it is told in each individual account, honouring the voice of every author and preserving the unique details of their narratives. Bjorn Ironside first appears in the Gesta Danorum, in an episode concerning his father Ragnar Lothbrok. This great chronicle was written by Saxo Grammaticus in the late 12th century, many centuries after Bjorn's time, yet it remains the most ambitious literary achievement of medieval Denmark, and a cornerstone for understanding its early history. According to the Gesta, when Ragnar had subdued the Saxons and laid tribute upon them, he learned that Herod, the king of Sweden, had died, and that his own sons had been deprived of their inheritance through the treachery of Saul, who had seized the throne. Ragnar summoned the aid of his sons, Bjorn, Fridleif and Radbard, and marched upon Sweden. Saul met him in the field, and offered him a choice between a full battle or a duel. Ragnar chose single combat. Saul then sent forth his champion, Starkad, famed for his courage, accompanied by his 7 sons. Ragnar, taking 3 of his own sons beside him, fought in view of both armies and won the contest. In that battle, Bjorn distinguished himself above all others. He struck down many foes and suffered no wound, for his sides were said to be as hard as iron, thus earning him the name Ironside. In gratitude for his valour, Ragnar rewarded him with the lordship of Sweden. Later, when Ragnar was captured and slain by King Aelle of Northumbria, Bjorn received the news while playing at dice, gripping the piece so tightly that blood rang from his fingers and splashed upon the table. He said bitterly that the throw of fate is more fickle than the cast of any dice. Bjorn then gathered a fleet of 400 ships and sailed to England. There, he openly challenged Aelle to meet him in battle. When they captured the king, they carved the shape of an eagle upon his back, rejoicing to mark their cruelest enemy with the bird of prey. They then salted his wounds, putting him to a gruesome death. This form of execution became known as the Blood Eagle. Having avenged his father, Bjorn Ironside returned to his own kingdom, and thus ends his tale in the Gesta Danorum. According to the saga of Ragnar and his sons, composed by an anonymous Icelandic author in the 13th century, the tale draws upon ancient legends and oral traditions that weave together history and myth from the Viking Age. In this saga, Ragnar Lothbrok weds Åslaug, the daughter of the hero Sigurd, Fafnir's bane, who in Norse legend slew the dragon Fafnir. From their union were born 4 famed sons, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Hvitserk, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. The sons of Ragnar set forth on raiding across England, Normandy, France, and Lombardy. It is said that their boldest venture was capturing the town of Luni, for they had an ambition to march upon the city of Rome itself. Their exploits became the most celebrated in all the northern lands where the Norse tongue was spoken. When at last they returned to their father's realm in Denmark, they divided the territories among themselves. To Bjorn Ironside fell Uppsala, the heart of Sweden, and the wide lands that owed allegiance to it. Thus ends Bjorn's story in the saga of Ragnar and his sons. The Chronicon Fontanellese, an anonymous chronicle composed between the years 840 and 856, records one of the earliest accounts of Bjorn Ironside. In the year 856, a great Danish fleet commanded by Duke Sihtric sailed up the river Seine and advanced as far as the fortress of Bjorn. After 33 days on the 19th of August, another Norse leader, Bjorn, arrived with a powerful fleet of his own. The two forces joined together, spreading fire and devastation through the lands as far as the Forest of Perch. There, they were met by King Charles the Bald and his army, who dealt them a crushing defeat. The next year, Sihtric withdrew from the river, while Bjorn fortified himself upon an island, constructing a stronghold there. In the year 859, King Charles besieged him by sea, hemming him with a naval blockade. Yet the rebellion of King Louis, Charles's brother, and other internal strife forced the king to abandon the siege, thus sparing Bjorn from capture. Bjorn reappears in the Annals of Saint Bertin. These annals, a collection of Frankish chronicles covering the years 830 to 882, were composed in medieval Latin by several authors, rather than a single hand. These annals record the political, religious and military affairs of West Francia in the turbulent years following the division of Charlemagne's Carolingian Empire. Within these pages, many historians identify Bjorn Ironside under the name Berno. The entry for the year 858 tells that Berno, a leader of Norse pirates upon the river Seine, came before King Charles the Bald at his palace. There, surrendering himself into the king's hands, swore an oath of allegiance and pledged his loyalty. The Deeds of the Norman Dukes was written by William of Jumièges, a Norman monk, in around the year 1070. In his work he recounts the origins of the Normans and the Norse raids on Francia and the legendary Viking leaders who preceded Rollo, the first Duke of Normandy. The text states, "At the time Lothbrok, a most cruel pirate from the northern regions, was driven by a storm to the coasts of Northumbria. He left behind sons of great ferocity, among them Björn, who leading fleets of Danes and Norsemen brought ruin to the kingdom of the Franks." Björn clearly corresponds to Bjorn Ironside, known from Norse sagas and Frankish annals. According to William, the Viking chief Haston, acting as a stepfather to Bjorn, conceived a bold idea: to place Bjorn Ironside upon the throne of the Roman Empire, becoming a ruler of the lands of the Mediterranean. Together, they forged a plan to raid the coasts of the ancient world, bringing both riches and glory to their Viking horde. The Vikings set sail from the Loire, the longest river in France, aboard a formidable fleet of 62 ships, each one a swift and deadly vessel of war. Their longships, designed for both speed and maneuverability, were ideal for raids upon distant shores, enabling the Vikings to strike quickly. Their first target was the Iberian Peninsula, where the Vikings capitalized on the relative weakness of the Christian kingdoms and the ongoing strife between the local rulers and the Muslim Saracens. In the year 859, the kingdom of Asturias, located in what is now northern Spain, was ruled by King Ordoño I, a monarch embroiled in relentless war against the Saracens. These Muslim invaders had swept across the Iberian Peninsula since the year 711, leaving destruction in their wake as they established a powerful Islamic state that stretched across much of Spain. As the Vikings landed on the coast of Asturias, they were met with little resistance and quickly set about raiding the region. However, their initial success was met with a challenge. The local Christian forces, led by Count Don Pedro of Asturias, gathered their strength and launched a counterattack, defeating the Vikings in a bloody skirmish. Despite suffering heavy losses, Heston and Bjorn were undeterred. They turned their focus towards the Saracens themselves, raiding their strongholds and engaging in a series of bloody skirmishes and sieges. One of the most glorious and audacious raids of their campaign took place in the Emirate of Cordoba, a powerful Arab Islamic state that controlled much of southern Spain. Heston and Bjorn would besiege the city of Algeciras, a major port on the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. For 3 days, they laid siege to the city, their forces overwhelming the defenders. After taking the city, they looted the homes of the wealthy and burned to the ground the 2 most important mosques in the city. With their raid complete, they amassed a great wealth in gold, silver, and slaves, goods they would later sell or use to fuel their ongoing Mediterranean campaign. Emboldened by their success, Heston and Bjorn turned their sights southward, venturing across the narrow Strait of Gibraltar to strike at the heart of North Africa. The Vikings sailed to the coast of modern-day Morocco and Algeria, where they targeted the Idrisid dynasty, a Muslim kingdom ruled by the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. The Vikings ravaged coastal cities, looting them for treasure and taking prisoners who would later be sold into slavery. Their rampage continued eastward to the Balearic Islands, where they laid waste to the islands of Majorca and Menorca, and further to the eastern Mediterranean, where they seized the coastal town of Orihuela. Their campaign also took them to the town of Neckel, where they established a temporary base and held the town for a period of 8 days. As winter approached, Heston and Bjorn sought shelter at Camargue Island, located at the mouth of the Rhône River in what is now southern France. Here they would rest and regroup before resuming their campaign. Their next targets were the wealthy cities in southern France, where they wreaked havoc, looting treasures and taking prisoners. Their raids did not stop there, however. The Viking fleet continued to march northward, reaching as far as Valence, before finally setting sail towards Italy. In their relentless pursuit of wealth, glory, and eternal renown, Bjorn Ironside and the cunning Heston set sail along the rugged Italian coastline. Their eyes were fixed on Luni, a town that, with its crumbling ruins and grandiose architecture, had once been a beacon of power and splendour. To the Viking raiders, however, its decaying stone walls and towering monuments held a promise greater than mere riches. They believed they had found the fabled city of Rome itself, the heart of the ancient world. Heston, ever the strategist, knew that brute force alone could not win the day. He could see the imposing walls of the town, and recognized that a frontal assault would be fruitless. Instead, he devised a plan so devious and cunning that it would go down in the annals of Viking legend. He knew the town's religious zeal would be their weakness. Under the guise of a dying man seeking redemption, Heston ordered his men to carry him to the town's gates on a stretcher. His body feigned to be on the verge of death. The guards allowed them entry. Word spread quickly that a Viking warlord sought to embrace Christianity before his final breath. Moved by the belief in redemption, they ushered him into the town's church. Once inside, Heston was presented with the sacred rites of the Christian faith, receiving the sacraments in the eyes of the town's clergy, as the faithful prayed for his soul. But this was no humble man seeking salvation. In a moment of divine mockery, Heston leaped from his stretcher. He rallied his men, and in the blink of an eye, They descended upon Luni like wolves upon a flock of sheep. The town was sacked in a frenzy of violence. Riches were stolen, homes were burned, and the once proud church was desecrated. Another account claims that Heston's ruse was even more elaborate, claiming that he would embrace Christianity on his deathbed, only to feign death on the following day. The townsfolk, fooled by his pretense, allowed him and 50 of his men draped in robes to enter the church for his supposed burial. But as the funeral rites began, Heston sprang from his coffin, his sword flashing through the air, and with a single swift strike, he decapitated the priest, sending shockwaves of fear through the town. In a brutal moment of triumph, the Viking raiders unleashed their fury upon Luni, sacking the city and its treasures. Yet, the story of the raid takes an unexpected turn. As Bjorn and Heston stood amidst the chaos, claiming victory over the mighty Rome, the townspeople corrected them. The city they had conquered was not Rome, it was Luni, a shadow of the empire they sought to claim. Enraged by this humiliation, their wrath erupted. The Vikings ordered the slaughter of every male resident and the capture of many women and children, who would later become their slaves. Undeterred, the Vikings sailed south along the Italian coast. They set their sights on Pisa, where their longships wreaked havoc upon the city's walls, plundering it. However, as the fleet made its way back towards the Loire, fate dealt them a cruel blow. A violent storm tore through the Viking fleet, and they were forced to abandon nearly 40 of their ships to the sea's mercy. 2 more vessels were lost at the Straits of Gibraltar. Despite this, Bjorn pressed on, his fleet battered but still formidable. He would turn his attention to the city of Pamplona. There, the Vikings struck once more, raiding the city. The Vikings even captured King Garcia Iñiguez of Pamplona, holding him captive for a hefty ransom. The price for the king's release was an astounding 70,000 gold dinars, a coin of immense value in the medieval Islamic world. With their coffers brimming with gold, slaves, and spoils of war, Bjorn and his warriors made their way home. The legendary saga is a Norse saga that takes place before the settlement in Iceland. The sagas were all probably written in Iceland, from about the middle of the 13th century to about the year 1400 by an unknown author. One day, Ivar turned to his brothers Hvitserk and Bjorn and asked how long they would remain idle at home, letting their renown fade instead of growing. They replied they would follow his counsel, as they always had. Then Ivar said, "Let us have ships made ready, and enough men to crew them. Let us seek gold and glory for ourselves if fate allows it." His brothers agreed, and together they went before Ragnar, asking for ships and seasoned warriors skilled in plunder and battle. Ragnar granted their request, and when all was prepared, they set sail. Wherever they fought, they were victorious, gaining riches, men, and fame in every land they touched. But Ivar soon said, "Let us not rest until we meet a force greater than our own, so that we may test our strength." His brothers asked where such a challenge might be found, and he answered, "In a place called Vitabair, where pagan sacrifices are held. Many have tried to conquer it, yet none have prevailed. Even our father once went there, but he was forced to turn back." "Are its defenders so mighty," they asked, "or is it guarded by some other power?" "Both," Ivar replied. "The warriors there are strong, and the place itself is filled with dark sorcery. Yet I would know which is greater, our courage or their magic." So they set their course for Hvitvaber. When they reached its shores, they made ready to land, leaving some men to guard the ships. Their youngest brother Rognvald was thought to be too young for such a danger, so he remained behind with part of the host. As Ivar's army advanced, he warned his men of the enemy's strange guardians, two monstrous geldings whose dreadful cries had driven all invaders to madness. "Stand firm," Ivar said. "Do not let fear master you, for no harm will come to you while I lead." When the defenders loosened the bewitched beasts, they charged forth, bellowing so terribly that the bravest warriors faltered. Seeing this, Ivar, who was borne upon a shield, called for his bow. He loosed his arrows, and both creatures fell dead. Thus ended the terror that had guarded the fortress for so long. Back at the ships, Rognvald heard the sound of the battle and said, "Lucky are those who share such glory, while I am left behind. But I will not stay idle. Let us all go ashore." And so he did. He fought with great courage, but there he fell. The brothers pressed on to the fortress, renewing the attack. The defenders broke and fled, and Ragnar's sons pursued them in triumph. When they returned to the fortress, the brothers gathered up all the treasure within, then set fire to the houses and broke down the battlements until nothing remained but ashes and stone. Their vengeance complete, they boarded their ships and sailed away. From his hall at Uppsala ruled King Eystein, a powerful and headstrong man, wise in counsel, yet fierce in temper, and deeply devoted to the old gods. His daughter, Inembjorg, was famed throughout the north for her beauty. Eystein's most feared weapon was a sacred cow, named Sibilja, said to be filled with dark magic. Her dreadful bellowing could drive armies to madness, and so long as she guarded the land, no enemy dared assail Eystein's lands. Once King Eystein and Ragnar Lothbrok had been close friends. Each summer they held great feasts for one another, yet their bond was broken when Ragnar failed to appear at a wedding feast in Uppsala, an insult Eystein could not forgive. The quarrel began when Eystein had urged Ragnar to wed his daughter. Ragnar even pledged himself to her for a time, but Aslaug, warned by 3 small birds, revealed to him that she was the daughter of Sigurd Fafnirsbane and Brynhild. Realizing that Aslaug was of a noble lineage than Eystein's daughter, Ragnar renounced the match and did not return to Sweden. Outraged by this dishonour, Ragnar's sons Erik and Agnar gathered an army and marched on Uppsala. Though an ill omen marked their departure, a man slain as their ships launched, they pressed on undaunted. There they met King Eystein's host in battle. The king loosened Sibilja before his men, and heard terrible cries filling the air, sowing confusion and fear among Ragnar's warriors. Many fell beneath the slaughter. Only Erik and Agnar held their ground. Agnar was struck down, and Erik was taken captive. He was offered peace and the hand of Eystein's daughter, but he refused both, choosing death over dishonour. He asked only that his men be spared. Then, standing tall beneath the dark wings of the circling ravens, Erik was lifted upon a forest of spears, meeting his end with fearless pride. When Bjorn heard the news, he spoke a verse to his mother Aslaug. Though little is said in speech, a man may turn over vengeance in his heart, in his hawk-swift chest. We do not have a serpent nor a shining snake in our eyes, but my brothers gladdened me. I will remember your stepsons. When 5 nights had passed, Hvitserk and Bjorn had made ready 14 ships. 2 nights later, when a full 7 had gone by since their first vow to sail, Ivar had prepared 10 ships of his own, and Aslaug their mother another 10. Then the family met together, speaking of the strength they had gathered. Ivar told them he had also sent mounted warriors to march by land, so that their enemies would be pressed from every side. Word soon reached King Eystein. Messengers came breathless before him, telling how a fierce army had swept into his lands, burning, plundering, leaving no house standing and no field unravaged. "We shall take with us Sibilja, our sacred cow," said the king, "for she is a god to our people. Let her run before the host, as no man shall stand before her dreadful bellowing. Together we shall drive off this cruel and mighty foe." So it was done. Sibilja was loosened before the ranks, and her terrible cries shook the air. When Ivar saw her charging, and heard that unearthly roar, he ordered his men to raise their own clamour, to clash sword upon shield and shout their war cries, so that the beast's voice might be drowned in their fury. He told his shield bearers to carry him forward, closer to the heart of the fray. Then Ivar took up his bow and let fly his arrows. Each shaft found its mark, and the enchanted cow fell, struck down amid her own thunderous cries. The armies met in a storm of steel. Never, said the Swedes afterwards, had they known such a trial of strength and valour. Hvitserk and Bjorn fought like men possessed, cutting through the battle lines so that none could stand before them. The ground was red with the slain, and Eystein's great host was broken. Many fell where they stood, others turned and fled. At last, King Eystein himself was struck down, and the sons of Ragnar won a mighty victory. Then the brothers resolved amongst themselves to set out raiding in the southern kingdom. In those wars, they struck at every stronghold that stood against them, and none could withstand their might. From there they sailed onward until they came to the city called Luna. By that time, they had laid waste to nearly every town and fortress in the whole southern realm. Their fame had spread so widely that no child, however young, did not know the names of Ragnar's sons. Yet even in their triumph they were restless. They swore not to rest until they had reached Romaborg, the mighty city of Rome itself, famed for its wealth, its multitude of men, and its glory. But they did not know how far the journey lay, and their army was so vast that they could no longer feed it. While they lingered at Luna, they gathered to speak of what should be done. Then there came before them an old man, withered, sharp-eyed, and cunning. When they asked who he was, he said that he was a poor wanderer who had spent his life travelling through many lands. From his words, the sons of Ragnar learned that the road to Rome was long and perilous, beyond their strength to follow. So they turned their course aside, and in their wandering they captured many towns that had never before fallen to sword or fire. Having harried long in the southern kingdom, the brothers then set their sails northward, to return to their father's realm, where King Ragnar ruled. Yet they knew nothing of his fate, or the battles he had fought, and their hearts were eager for tidings. As they passed through the southern lands, fear went before them. Wherever word spread of their coming, people fled their towns, carrying away what they could, so that the brothers found little left behind, neither food nor foe to face them. The journey continued until they reached Denmark, arriving there before the messengers of King Eilert. There they remained in quiet readiness with their men. When at last the messengers came to the hall where Ragnar's sons were feasting, they entered and approached the high seat, where Ivar the Boneless lay reclined. Sigurd Snake in the Eye and Hvitserk were playing Nefertafel, the game of kings, while Bjorn Ironside sat upon the floor, carving a spear shaft. The envoys of King Eilert greeted Ivar with courtesy. He returned their greeting, and asked whence they came and what news they bore. Their leader answered that they were men of England, sent by King Eilert himself, and that they brought tidings of Ragnar's death. At those words, Witzek and Sigurd let their gaming pieces fall from their hands, and all turned their eyes to the messengers. Bjorn rose slowly, leaning on his half-carved spear. Ivar asked them to tell every detail of how his father had met his end. So they told the tale from the time Ragnar landed in England to the hour he drew his last breath. When they came to the part where Ragnar had spoken his final words, the young boars will growl when they learn of the old boar's death. Bjorn gripped the spear shaft so fiercely that the print of his fingers remained upon it. When the tale was finished, he struck the shaft upon the floor and it splintered in two. Then the brothers gathered in council to decide how they might avenge their father's death. They manned their ships and sailed for England, both night and day, allowing no word of their coming to reach the shore ahead of them. Soon, the war tidings reached King Aelle himself. When the two hosts met, a great and dreadful battle began. The sons of Ragnar fell upon Aelle's army with such a fury that none could stand before them. Long and hard was the fight, but at last Aelle's men broke and fled. The king was captured alive. Then Ivar said, "Now is the time to repay the death that he dealt to our father. Let the most skilled of wood carvers come forth and carve an eagle upon his back, so deep that the wings shall glisten red with his blood." The craftsmen obeyed, and the work was done as Ivar commanded. King Aelle suffered greatly before his life left him, and thus the sons of Ragnar took their vengeance. Afterward, Ivar himself would remain to rule England, so Witzek, Bjorn and Sigurd returned north to their own kingdoms, while Ivar held dominion over the English lands. And when in time all the sons of Ragnar were dead, their war bands scattered across many lands. Yet those who had once followed them said that no other kings were ever their equals in courage, wisdom or might. The Hervarar saga, a legendary tale from the 13th century, weaves together traditions from older Germanic heroic legends. Among its many figures, it also speaks of Bjorn Ironside. According to the saga, Eystein the Wicked, son of King Harald Wartooth, ruled over Sweden after his father's death, until he was slain by the sons of Ragnar, as told in their own saga. Having conquered the Swedish realm, the sons of Ragnar divided their father's dominions among themselves. Bjorn Ironside took the Swedish throne, Sigurd ruled Denmark, Witzek held the eastern lands, and Ivar the Boneless claimed England. Bjorn's sons were Eirik and Refil. Refil became a renowned sea king and warrior, while Eirik succeeded his father as king of Sweden, but reigned only a short while. After his death, Eirik, son of Refil, ascended to the throne, a powerful ruler and a great warrior in his own right. The saga continues by naming the descendants of Bjorn Ironside as the ancient kings of Sweden. The rumoured burial mound of Bjorn Ironside lies on Munson Island in Lake Mälaren, Sweden, measuring some 20 metres in diameter and rising 5 metres high. The mound is part of a larger burial field that includes 5 burial mounds, a runestone, and roughly 145 round stone settings, representing a collection of ancient remains. Legend holds that King Bjorn Ironside himself was laid to rest within this mound, which is often called King Bjorn's Mound. Bjorn Ironside stands as a central figure in countless tales of Viking conquest and adventure. While historians debate the accuracy of these stories, his legacy endures in Norse mythology and in the rich tapestry of Viking legend. Atop the mount sits a runestone, though only a fragment remains, and its inscription is likewise incomplete. The stone likely dates from the late 11th century, making it several centuries younger than the mound itself. According to the sagas, After Bjorn's death, he was interred in a monumental mound near the shores of Lake Mälaren. The mound was said to be so large it could be seen from across the lake, and it was reportedly filled with the treasures and riches he had amassed during his life. Over the centuries, the mound became a place of reverence for Viking warriors and chieftains, who would visit to honour the legendary figure and seek the favour of his spirit. Some tales say that at night the spirits of the dead would gather around the mound, and the sounds of their feasting and revelry could be heard for miles. Thus ends the tale of Bjorn Ironside. I will be taking you to the 10th and 11th century Scandinavia and England. This was a time of everlasting war, strife, betrayal, and bloodshed. Thorkell the Tall would distinguish himself amongst his fellow warriors for his immense fighting prowess. He would climb the ranks of the Vikings, the most savage and highly skilled warriors in Scandinavia, and arguably the world, and would ultimately become their chief. This is his story. First, let's have a look at his early life. Thorkell the Tall, also known as Thorkell the High, was said to be born in the late 950s. He was the son of Strut Harald, a jarl who ruled over the Danish territory of Scania. Strut Harald was the son of Gorm the Old, the king of Denmark, so Thorkell had royal blood running through his veins. Once Thorkell had reached adulthood, it is said that he stood taller than any man. This, combined with his skill at arms, would lead him to the legendary order of the Vikings. So Thorkell would travel to their castle in Jomsborg in hopes of joining the famous mercenaries. According to the Vikings saga, Thorkell the Tall and his brother Sigvaldi prepared a trip to Jomsborg to see if they could get into the legendary order. Their father said to them it would be wise to join the Vikings to increase their fame and honour. He would also say to them, "It is now time for you two brothers to put to the test whether you are worth anything as men." The Vikings were an order of Viking warriors who had a particular way of life. It was not easy to become a Viking, as only elite warriors who had proven themselves worthy could even join the order. A man was required to prove themselves with a feat of strength, such as lifting a huge boulder, or they would have to duel a real Viking and defeat them in single combat to be admitted. Once admitted, you would have to adhere to a strict way of life in order to strengthen your mind and body. Each Viking was bound to defend his brothers in arms, and if they fell on the battlefield, or in any other way, their deaths would need to be avenged for their spirit to be at ease. It was forbidden to speak ill of another member behind their backs, as this was a sign of cowardice. Blood feuds between the members were mediated by officers, and they were forbidden to show any fear or flee from the battlefield. All spoils of war were to be shared among the members equally, and no Viking could be absent from their stronghold for more than 3 days, unless they were on a campaign, or had permission from the Brotherhood. No women or children were allowed within the fortress walls, and none were to be taken captive. Any violation of these rules would result in expulsion from the order. Thorkell would pass his initiation and join the order. He would soon have his first taste of battle in the year 986. The Vikings had accepted payment from Harald Bluetooth, a Christian, whose aim it was to convert Norway and Denmark to Christianity. The Vikings were pagan, but they fought for gold, not for personal ethics, and they joined Harald to fight against a fellow pagan, Hakon Sigurdarson. Thorkell looked forward to proving himself in battle in front of his new brothers. The order of mercenaries sailed to Norway and could see that they were outnumbered. The Vikings and their allied forces only had 60 ships, while the enemy had 180. Thorkell knew that one Viking was worth 10 men, and showed no fear. Before the battle commenced, a hailstorm would begin. The ships would then ram into each other, and the Battle of Ojunkavar would begin. The battle was fierce, and both sides would take many casualties. Thorkell would fight with a trance-like fury, killing anyone in his path. However, Sigvaldi, the new leader of the Jomsvikings order, saw the devastation and the amount of warriors that were being slaughtered and ordered a retreat. This resulted in his name being disgraced. He would still, however, remain as the chief of the Jomsvikings. Thorkell would later take part in the largest naval battle of the Viking Age, the Battle of Swold. In the year 1000, the Jomsvikings allied themselves with King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway. However, in this particular naval battle, Sigvaldi, the chief of the Jomsvikings, betrayed King Olaf and told him rumours of a fake, planned ambush. He then lured him into a real ambush in the Baltic Sea, and him and the Jomsvikings slaughtered his men. King Olaf would then commit suicide by jumping into the sea. Thorkell's brother Sigvaldi and the chief of the Jomsvikings would soon meet his end in England. Thorkell knew that his predecessor had been ridiculed after the Battle of Ujunkuvar, due to him breaking his order's sacred laws of no retreat in the face of the enemy, and not allowing his men to die gloriously on the battlefield. Thorkell also knew of his brother's treachery in the Battle of Svold, but may have overlooked this, as King Olaf wanted to convert the world to Christianity. Nonetheless, the name and reputation of the Sacred Order had been tainted by cowardice and treachery. Thorkell, however, a man of honour, had sworn an oath when he joined the Order, and the death of Sigvaldi, his former lord and brother, had to be avenged. In August of the year 1009, Thorkell and his band of warriors would sail to Sandwich in England. There they would kill, raid and pillage for wealth and for revenge. Thorkell would eventually march his men to Canterbury, where he was paid £3,000 of silver by the people of Kent to sway him and his men from attacking. Thorkell and his men would now reside in England instead of returning to their castle in Jomsborg. On September the 8th, in the year 1011, Thorkell returned to Canterbury and laid siege to the city for 3 weeks. They were eventually able to take the city, but they took it by treachery. An Englishman named Aethmer gave Thorkell the information he needed to break into the city. Soon enough, the Jomsvikings would occupy the great and rich city of Canterbury. They would take many hostages of importance, such as the Archbishop of Canterbury. This, however, would prove to be a mistake. The Archbishop would convert many Jomsvikings to Christianity during his captivity, creating tension amongst the order. The pagan Jomsvikings and Thorkell would soon grow sick of the Archbishop and would demand £3,000 of silver for his release. The Archbishop, however, bravely refused to be ransomed and told the people not to pay the order of mercenaries. This would further infuriate the Jomsvikings. Later, at a great feast, the Jomsvikings would bask in each other's tales of glory and triumph, and while the warriors got increasingly drunk, their attention would turn to the Archbishop. They began pelting him with the bones of cattle and ham bones. Then an axeman approached him. He smashed the Archbishop on the back of his head with the butt of his axe, killing him. Thorkell was infuriated. Even though the Archbishop had caused problems, he could no longer ransom him, and Thorkell had instructed his warriors to not kill him. Throughout the Jomsviking occupation of Canterbury, they would raid southern England, using Canterbury as a base of operations. They eventually halted their attacks when they received a series of Danegeld payments, accumulating to around £50,000 of silver. Thorkell would then do something that no leader of the Jomsvikings had ever done before. He would ally himself with the King of England. The Jomsvikings at their core were mercenaries, so if the price was right, they would fight. Thorkell and his loyal Jomsvikings would enter the service of King Ethelred the Unready, and they would soon fight for him. In 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard and his son Canute would try to invade England with a large force. Thorkell and his Jomsvikings force would defend England and their new ally King Ethelred. Thorkell's efforts, however, were in vain, as by 1013 the English and Jomsviking resistance had collapsed, as Sweyn had proved himself to be a great general and conquered the whole country. Thorkell would personally escort Ethelred to his exile in Normandy. Sweyn, however, the brilliant general and new King of England, had a short-lived reign and died on the 3rd of February 1014, having the title of King of England for only 5 weeks. Ethelred, the exiled king, then saw his opportunity to take his land back. He sailed to England and recaptured London. Canute, who was Sweyn Forkbeard's son, then decided to withdraw from England by April. What happened to Thorkell and the Jomsvikings after this is unclear, but he did leave Ethelred's service and sailed to Denmark and swore allegiance to Sweyn's son Canute. Canute knew that Thorkell and the fabled Jomsvikings would be valuable and powerful allies, many of them being the veterans of 100 battles. He even overlooked the fact that they had fought against him and his father, which conveys that he knew of Thorkell's military prowess. England seemed to be a different land, however. A warrior prince had emerged, named Unnamed Ironside. He was the son of King Ethelred the Unready, and was everything a king should have been: strong, bold, and ready to fight and die for his country. He would inspire his men to follow him into the battlefield, and this would prove a problem to Thorkell and Canute. Nevertheless, Thorkell and his Jomsvikings would sail to England with the intention of taking it, just as Canute's father Sweyn had done a few years earlier. Over the next few months, while Canute and Thorkell conquered most of England, King Ethelred would die in April of 1016, leaving his son Unnamed Ironside to take up the defences of the country. Soon enough, the famed Unnamed Ironside and Canute would face each other head-on in the hills of Sjösten on June the 25th. The Danish and English armies would clash. Thorkell the Tall would summon his Jomsvikings from their 40 ships, and would face the enemy in the front line to prove his loyalty to Canute. The battle was fierce, and Thorkell and his Jomsvikings would fight with such ferociousness that no man could face them, vanquishing all Englishmen in their path. But Unnamed Ironside, the warrior prince, would also fight amazingly, cutting down many Danish troops and inspiring his men to fight on. Canute and Edmund saw the amount of bloodshed and death, and eventually called the battle off, and neither side won that day. There would be no celebration that night, for the deaths on both sides were too many to count. Later that year, on the 16th of October 1016, a decisive battle would take place that would decide the fate of England. The Battle of Assendon would take place in Essex, where Canute and Thorkell would face off once again against Unnamed Ironside. During the battle, both the English and Danish armies fought valiantly, but Eadric Striona, the Ealdorman of Mercia, betrayed Unnamed Ironside and abandoned the battle, allowing the Vikings to break through the English lines and annihilate Edmund's forces. After the battle, the Vikings and Canute had such respect for Edmund as a warrior that they allowed him to rule Wessex, while Canute ruled the rest of the country until one of their deaths, in which the survivor would take control of England. Thorkell, the lord of the Jomsvikings, would be made into the Jarl of East Anglia for his help and fighting prowess against the English. Unnamed Ironside would soon die, leaving Canute to rule the whole of England. He would now be known to history as Canute the Great. Around 5 years later, for unknown reasons, Thorkell had a falling out with Canute and was banished from England. He would sail to Denmark. By 1023, the two men had reconciled, Canute perhaps sensing that the legendary Thorkell was too powerful a man to make an enemy of. He then granted Thorkell the earldom of Denmark and gave him the role as foster father for his son Harthcanute. After this, Thorkell completely disappears from history. His fate has been widely speculated. Most historians believe that he returned to the Jomsviking castle at Jomsborg. Thorkell the Tall, the lord of the Jomsvikings, no doubt lived a full life, but it was full of war, strife and bloodshed. He had been at war for over 30 years in the front lines from 986 to 1016 and never fell in battle. He was evidently a worthy leader of the fabled order of the Jomsvikings and has now been immortalised in the anime series Vinland Saga. The story of the last Berserker is set right at the end of the Viking Age. Many legends of Viking berserkers have survived throughout the ages, but the lone axeman of Stamford Bridge was the last. Before we delve into this tale, we must first understand the events leading up to the last stand. The year is 1066, and the death of King Edward the Confessor triggered a succession struggle in which a number of claimants to the crown of England had come forward. These claimants included Harold Godwinson, who had become a powerful earl after his father Godwin of Wessex died. With King Edward the Confessor dying without an heir, it was left to the Witan to choose a king, and they chose Harold Godwinson. Harold had a brother called Tostig Godwinson, who was the Earl of Northumbria, but Tostig would have some difficulty governing the land. He was never popular with the Northumbrian ruling class. He even murdered several members of the Northumbrian ruling families, and he was from the south of England, which had a distinctly different culture from the north. Eventually, the Thens of York rebelled against Tostig's rule, and killed all of his officials and supporters. Tostig's brother Harold agreed with the demands of the rebels, and Tostig would refuse to accept Harold's command. This led to a fateful confrontation between the two Godwinson brothers, in which Tostig accused Harold of starting the rebellion. Harold needed to retain his throne, as William of Normandy had openly declared his intention to take the English throne. So he exiled his brother Tostig, as he needed to ensure that the northern earls stayed loyal to him. Tostig, however, plotted vengeance against his brother Harold. Tostig would make contact with King Harald Hardrada of Norway, and he would make his way to his court. He was greatly impressed with the battle-hardened living legend that was the King of Norway, and he managed to sway an unenthusiastic Hardrada, who had just finished a long inconclusive war with Denmark, to ready his army to take England. So in the September of 1066, Hardrada set sail for England with around 300 longships. He was reinforced by Tostig, who brought soldiers and ships, and together they sailed along the river Ouse towards the city of York. They would soon arrive at the mouth of the Humber River. Harold's army quickly moved towards York, where they were confronted by the King of England's earls, Edwin and Morcar. This would culminate in the Battle of Fulford. The English would strike first, advancing on the Norwegian army before it could fully deploy. Morcar's troops would push Harold back into the marshland, but Harold brought more of his troops from the right flank to attack the centre. Even though the Viking invaders were outnumbered, they forced the Anglo-Saxons to give ground. Meanwhile, other Viking forces were still arriving to the battleground, where they found a way to get around the thick of the fighting, and opened a third front against the Anglo-Saxons, who were now outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The English army was defeated and took heavy losses, while the Viking forces lost less than 1,000 men. York surrendered to Harald Hardrada, and his army would retire to Stamford Bridge, 7 miles east of York, to wait for the arrival of hostages. Harold Godwinson would soon learn of the Viking invasion, and he would head north at great speed, with as many earls, lords and warriors as he could gather, travelling day and night. He made his journey from London to Yorkshire, which is around 200 miles in only 4 days. This gave Harold Godwinson the element of surprise, as Hardrada and his Viking army had no idea the King of England was so close. Until the Viking army physically saw the Anglo-Saxon warriors, they were completely unaware of their presence. Harold Hardrada's army had no idea what had hit them. Caught completely by surprise on the morning of the 25th of September, the English army ran straight downhill into the Viking enemy forces. Many of them were completely unaware and hadn't even put on their armour. This surprise attack would culminate in the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Vikings appeared to have quickly formed a defensive position in the front line, while the bulk of the army retreated across the bridge to the eastern bank of the Derwent River. The Norsemen who stood and bought time for the others were quickly cut down, but one man emerged from them and would stand guard on the bridge, awaiting the ferocity of the English enemy forces. According to legend, one lone axeman held the bridge against the whole English army to allow his fellow Vikings to regroup and form a shield wall. It is said that he was a Viking berserker, having gone through the process in which he abandoned his humanity by bonding with the savage world. This warrior would no longer be an ordinary man, but a warrior shaman who could connect with the spirit of the bear. That way, the spirit gave him its strength and ferocity, allowing the berserker to go beyond the confines of humanity and fight with a trance-like fury. And that he did. With the bridge being narrow, not many soldiers could fit through, so the berserker could fight to the fullest, embracing his rage, skill, and supernatural strength and resilience. Englishmen would advance towards the Viking berserker, only to be met by a swift death. The Norseman wielded his two-handed great axe and would swing it savagely, killing all men in his path. But as one Englishman died, another would run over his corpse and would fight the berserker. In the end, 40 Anglo-Saxon warriors were slain on the bridge. None were even a close match for the lone berserker. Eventually, a brave English soldier floated just under the Viking warrior in a half-barrel and stabbed the berserker in the groin, bringing him to his knees, allowing the English to slay the legendary warrior. But how did this unnamed warrior have the strength, stamina and resilience to kill 40 warriors all coming at him? One explanation is that he was in the state of the berserker, embodying the spirit of a bear. Taking on its strength and savagery, the berserker would die due to the human body being pushed past its physical limits in terms of blood loss and fatigue. This is conveyed in many sagas, which show the berserkers inherited physical immunity during battle. Many tales say how no weapon would bite them, and how they were harmed by neither fire nor iron. This explains the concept of immunity, as while in the berserker state, the shaman warrior may receive wounds, but due to the savage nature of their embodying spirit, they would take no note of the injuries until they had passed from the berserker state. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this is what happened during the battle. The Northmen fled from the English. There was one there of the Norwegians who withstood the English people, so that they might not pass over the bridge, nor obtain the victory. Then an Englishman aimed at him with a javelin, but availed nothing. And then came another under the bridge, and pierced him terribly inwards under the coat of mail. Then came Harold, king of the English, over the bridge, and forced onward with him, and there made a great slaughter of the Norwegians. This piece of text is important, as it states, an Englishman aimed at him with a javelin, but availed nothing. This could mean that the Viking berserker was indeed struck with a javelin, but due to his frenzy, it had no effect, and he simply kept fighting on, as if nothing had happened. Nevertheless, the unnamed warrior fell, and his forces prepared for an onslaught. Harald Hardrada, having more experience in war than any other man on the battlefield, got stuck into the thick of the fighting. The 50-year-old veteran grasped his sword with his 2 hands, and with no armour, ran into the English army. Death wasn't on his mind, as he had faced it many times before, and he fought with no fear. But fate works in mysterious ways. Harald Hardrada, the most accomplished warrior present, was struck in the throat with an arrow, and there at Stamford Bridge, he bled out and died. Harold Godwinson's brother Tostig was also slain at the battle. And so the Viking Age came to an end. England was no longer in danger from any Viking invasions, due to the last great Viking king Harald Hardrada dying on English soil. The last stand of the lone berserker has gone down in legend, leaving the English with a lasting impression that some of the Viking warriors could go berserk and gain supernatural abilities during battle. Unfortunately, the name of the Viking berserker has been lost to time, but we still remember his heroic deed. If you want to know about the berserkers and Ulfhednar warriors in detail, please check out my other videos on them. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all soon for another History Profile.